Ionescu, long three, it's contested. Oh!
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. What happens when confidence crosses into comparison, and the comparison is Michael Jordan? What happens when one player is building a legacy through performance, while another is building a spotlight through personality? Because right now, in women's basketball, we are watching two completely different journeys unfold at the same time. On one side, you have a player who is quietly transforming the league, breaking records, filling arenas, shifting the entire attention of the sport, and delivering performances that demand respect every single night. On the other side, you have a player who is loud, visible, marketable, and undeniably influential, but whose on-court production is constantly being questioned. Two stars, two narratives, two very different realities. And the gap between hype and legacy has never been more obvious. Let's talk about the moment that sparked everything. Angel Reese didn't just admire greatness. She didn't just say she looked up to legends. She went further. She openly compared herself to Michael Jordan. Not in a subtle way, not as inspiration, but as a direct comparison in terms of play style, mentality, and overall presence on the court. That's not a small statement. That's not something people just hear and forget. Because when you bring up Michael Jordan, you're invoking the highest possible standard in basketball history. You are stepping into a conversation where excellence is not optional, it is required at the absolute peak level. Michael Jordan wasn't just great. He was dominant in a way that defined an era. A player who shot over 50% from the field across his career. A 6-time champion. A 6-time Finals MVP. A 10-time scoring leader, a 5-time league MVP, a global icon whose impact went far beyond basketball. He didn't just win, he controlled the game, every possession, every moment. So when you put that name next to yours, the expectation changes instantly. Now the conversation becomes, do the numbers match the statement? And this is where things start to separate. Angel Reese had an impressive rookie season in certain areas. There's no denying her ability to rebound the basketball. Leading the league in rebounds is not easy, and it speaks to effort, positioning, and physical presence. Averaging over 13 rebounds per game is elite production on the glass. But basketball is not just about one skill. It's about efficiency. It's about scoring. It's about finishing plays, especially in the areas where you are expected to dominate. And that's where the concerns begin. Her field goal percentage as a rookie sat below 40%. That alone raises questions. But when you look deeper, the numbers become even more alarming. Around the rim, the most favorable position on the floor for a player of her size, her efficiency dropped to levels that are almost unheard of for a professional post player. We're talking about missed layups, missed point-blank opportunities, shots that are expected to go in, more often than not, simply not falling. In practical terms, this means that more than half the time she got exactly where she needed to be, the result was empty. And in today's game, that doesn't just stay on the stat sheet. It gets noticed. It gets clipped. It gets shared. Announcers react in real time. Fans break it down. Social media amplifies every miss, every struggle, every inconsistency. And suddenly, the conversation shifts from potential to performance. Now compare that to what's happening on the other side. While one player is being questioned for efficiency, the other is redefining expectations entirely. Caitlin Clark isn't just playing well, she is reshaping how the game is watched, how it is marketed, and how it is valued. She's putting up numbers that translate directly into wins, into attention, into growth for the entire league. She's not just part of the conversation, she is the conversation. And that's the difference between noise and impact. But here's where the story takes a powerful turn. Because sometimes, the most important moments don't happen during games. They happen in conversations. And one of the most important conversations in this entire situation came from a legend, someone who understands the game at the highest level, someone who has lived it, dominated it, and mastered it. Lisa Leslie. She didn't criticize from a distance. She didn't go on television and deliver a safe, filtered opinion. She sat down face-to-face, on Angel Reese's own platform, in her own space, and said exactly what needed to be said. That alone takes respect. Because real mentorship is not about protecting feelings, it's about telling the truth. And the truth was simple.
Time for that, you'd never think this would be the score. Cunningham again!
The biggest area that needs improvement is finishing. Layups. The most basic, fundamental, essential part of a post player's game. Fixable, yes, but impossible to ignore. And when you look at the data, her point becomes undeniable. A conversion rate on layups that falls far below league standards. A finishing percentage near the rim that ranks among the lowest in high-volume attempts. Numbers that don't just show inconsistency, they highlight a serious gap in efficiency. At one point, her early season performance dipped so low in restricted area finishing that it separated her from every other player in the league, not just slightly, but significantly. And historically, those numbers place her in a category that no player wants to be in. Not because of effort, not because of talent, but because of execution. And that's what makes Lisa Leslie's voice so important in this conversation. Because she's not speaking from theory. She's speaking from experience. A career built on dominance. Championships. MVPs, Olympic gold medals. Efficiency at the highest level. A player who understood exactly what it takes to succeed in that position, in that role, under that pressure. When she talks about finishing, it's not advice. It's a standard. But here's what many people miss, and this matters just as much. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't tearing someone down. It was building someone up. Because alongside the criticism, there was recognition. Recognition of effort. Recognition of growth. Recognition of potential. Improved ball handling. Defensive intensity. Energy on the court. The willingness to learn. Those are not small things. Those are the foundations of improvement. And most importantly, there was belief. Belief that growth is possible. Belief that with the right mindset, the right work, and the right coaching, the weaknesses can become strengths. That is what real mentorship looks like. Not silence. Not blind praise. But honesty, backed by experience, delivered with purpose. And this brings us back to the bigger picture. Because this is no longer just about one player, or one comparison, or one moment. This is about direction. The WNBA is growing. The spotlight is getting bigger. The audience is expanding. The expectations are rising. And with that growth comes a question: what defines greatness in this new era? Is it branding? Is it visibility? Is it personality? Or is it performance? Because in the end, the game has always answered that question the same way. Through results. Through consistency. Through impact. Legacy is not built on statements. It's built on what you do, over and over again, when everyone is watching. And right now, we are watching two very different paths unfold. One built on production. The other still searching for consistency. One already changing the game. The other still trying to prove she belongs at the highest level of it. And maybe that's what makes this moment so important. Because it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. The question is no longer about comparisons. The question is simple: who is going to rise and actually define the future of this league?
So the Fever miss on their final look.
The most powerful version of truth isn't the one whispered behind closed doors. It's the one delivered directly, face to face, with no filters, no fear, and no room for misunderstanding. And that's exactly what happened when a Hall of Famer sat across from Angel Reese on her own show, in front of her own audience, and said what many had been thinking, but no one had been willing to say out loud. By the time that moment happened, the conversation had already started. It didn't begin with that interview. It didn't begin with a headline. It began on the court. Missed layups had already been circulating across social media. Clips were being replayed again and again. Broadcasters were reacting in real time, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes even with laughter. Fans had already turned those moments into memes. The narrative wasn't created by Lisa Leslie, it was already alive and spreading. What Lisa Leslie did was something much more significant. She walked into that conversation and gave it credibility. She gave it weight. She gave it a level of authority that couldn't be dismissed, ignored, or spun into something else. Because when someone with her resume speaks, it's not just opinion, it's validation. And yet, What makes this moment even more important is what happened next. Angel Reese didn't collapse under that pressure. She didn't ignore the criticism. She responded. Over time, her efficiency improved. Her field goal percentage climbed, showing signs that the message had landed, that the work was being done, that there was growth. But even with that improvement, a larger question still remains, and it's a question that goes far beyond one player. Can production catch up to the brand before the market makes that decision on its own? Because while all of this was happening, while comparisons were being made, while critiques were being delivered, while improvements were slowly taking shape, something entirely different was unfolding in another city. In Indianapolis, Caitlin Clark wasn't talking about greatness. She was building it. And she wasn't doing it through statements or comparisons or personality-driven narratives. She was doing it through something far more powerful, measurable impact. Her rookie season wasn't just impressive. It was transformative. Not just for her team, not just for her career, but for the entire league. She didn't just win Rookie of the Year. She didn't just make the All-WNBA first team. She didn't just lead the league in assists and three-pointers. She changed the economics of women's basketball. And that's not exaggeration. That's data. Game after game, millions of viewers tuned in, not occasionally, but consistently. Broadcast networks saw numbers they had never seen before. Ratings climbed. Engagement exploded. And suddenly, the WNBA wasn't just growing, it was accelerating. Entire portions of the league's economic activity began to revolve around one player's presence on the court. Attendance skyrocketed. Arenas that once struggled to fill seats were now packed to capacity. The Indiana Fever went from near the bottom of attendance rankings to the very top and stayed there. Merchandise sales surged. Fan interest expanded beyond the traditional audience. People who had never watched a WNBA game before were now tuning in, buying tickets, following the league. This wasn't hype. This was impact. Real, measurable, undeniable impact. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. Television networks took notice. Not casually, but aggressively. What had once been a league fighting for stability suddenly became a product that companies were competing to invest in. Major broadcast deals followed. Long-term contracts worth hundreds of millions per year. That doesn't happen because of potential. That happens because of proof. Because executives saw something change in real time. They saw what happened when Caitlin Clark stepped onto the floor, and they responded with investment. That's cause and effect. And even when adversity came, the impact didn't disappear. When injuries sidelined her, the audience didn't vanish. The interest didn't collapse. Viewership continued to rise. Engagement remained strong. Because by that point, the connection had already been built. That's what true influence looks like. It doesn't fade when you're not playing.
Here's Petty, a deep.
It continues because you've already changed how people see the game. And when she returned, she didn't just ease back into form. She proved, once again, that her value goes beyond scoring. Her vision, her passing, her ability to elevate everyone around her. These are the qualities that define a franchise player. The kind of player organizations build around. The kind of player leagues depend on. And off the court, the foundation matched the performance. Major endorsements, long-term deals, partnerships with global brands. Every contract tied not just to who she is, but to what she produces. Because that's the difference. One path is built on projection. The other is built on results. And eventually, the market always reveals which one matters more. But perhaps the most important perspective in all of this didn't come from statistics or headlines. It came from Lisa Leslie. In that same conversation, she said something that goes beyond basketball. Something that explains the entire situation in a way numbers alone cannot. When one player eats, everyone eats. That's not just a quote. That's reality. Because Caitlin Clark's rise didn't take anything away from the league, it added to it. It expanded it. It elevated it. More viewers means more revenue. More revenue means better salaries. Better salaries mean better conditions, better opportunities, better futures for every player in the league. And that's exactly what happened. Attendance increased across the board. Not just for one team, but for the entire league. Games were moved into larger arenas just to handle the demand. Teams that had never needed bigger venues suddenly found themselves upgrading locations. Cities adjusted. Organizations adapted. The entire infrastructure shifted. All because one player changed the level of interest. That's not influence. That's transformation. And it extended into financial structures as well. Salary caps increased dramatically. Maximum contracts grew. Average player earnings rose significantly. Travel conditions improved. Benefits expanded. Protections strengthened. Every one of those changes was tied to revenue. And that revenue didn't appear out of nowhere. It followed attention. It followed engagement. It followed impact. Which brings us back to the central idea. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about understanding reality. Branding matters. Personality matters. Marketability matters. But none of it can replace production. Because in the end, the game decides. The numbers decide. The audience decides. And the market always tells the truth. Right now, we are watching that truth unfold in real time. One player is still trying to align performance with perception. The other has already aligned performance with impact and is now redefining what that impact means for an entire league. And maybe that's the real story here. Not comparison. Not controversy. But contrast. The difference between being talked about and actually changing the game. There are moments in sports that go beyond highlights, beyond stats, beyond even wins and losses. Moments that reveal something bigger, something structural. And what we're witnessing right now in the WNBA is exactly that kind of moment. Because when one single player forces opposing franchises to physically upgrade their arenas just to accommodate the demand she creates, that's not hype. That's not media exaggeration. That's infrastructure-level impact. That is the kind of shift that doesn't just change a game, it changes a business, a league, and the expectations surrounding it. This had never happened before. Not in this league. Not at this scale. Teams weren't just adjusting game plans, they were changing buildings. Moving games into NBA arenas. Expanding capacity. Preparing for crowds that simply didn't exist before. And that's when the conversation stops being about opinion and starts being about reality. Because the reality is simple. Attention drives everything. And when Lisa Leslie asked that simple, direct question, if more eyeballs on the game is what everyone wants, and one player is clearly bringing those eyeballs, then why would anyone have a problem with her getting more television games? It wasn't just a rhetorical moment. It was a challenge. A challenge to the entire conversation surrounding fairness, exposure, and recognition. And what made that moment even more powerful was where it happened. Not on a debate show. Not in a neutral studio. But on Angel Reese's own platform. In her own space. Into her own microphone. With her sitting right there. That changes everything. Because it removes distance. It removes interpretation. It removes the ability to spin the message into something softer or more comfortable. It was direct. It was honest. And it forced the issue into the open. Now, to be fair, there is a real emotion underneath all of this. A very real one. Because this league is full of players who have been grinding for years. Players who have built their careers without this level of attention, without these opportunities, without the financial rewards that are now starting to appear. So when a rookie steps in and suddenly generates a wave worth hundreds of millions, possibly billions, it's natural for that to create tension. It's natural for that to feel unfair. That feeling is human. But here's where the difference lies. Lisa Leslie didn't dismiss that feeling, she moved through it. She pointed out something deeper. Something that separates temporary frustration from long-term understanding. She highlighted the difference between attitude and impact. She spoke about humility, about respect for the game, about acknowledging those who came before, about understanding that success isn't just about you, it's about what your success does for everyone around you. And without naming anyone directly, she drew a contrast that didn't need names. On one side, a player who is producing, elevating others, and expanding the entire ecosystem of the league. On the other, a player still working to align her production with her ambition. And in the same breath, in the same conversation, she returned to the fundamentals. Finish at the rim. Because at the end of the day, no matter how big the conversation gets, no matter how loud the narratives become, the game itself always comes back to execution. One player praised for changing the game, another being coached on the basics. Same room, same microphone. That's not coincidence. That's contrast. And if you really want to understand that contrast, you don't even need to look at individual performances. Just look at the franchises. Look at what happened in Indiana. Look at what happened in Chicago. Because those two situations tell you everything. Indiana didn't just build a team, they built a system. A structure designed not only to highlight their star, but to sustain success even without her. They made aggressive moves, added experience, brought in championship-level talent, strengthened leadership, built depth, and then they were tested in the worst possible way. Injuries. Not one, not two. Multiple key players going down. Rotation pieces disappearing. Stability being challenged at every level. And yet, they didn't collapse. They adapted. Players stepped up. Roles expanded. Responsibility shifted. And the team continued to compete at a high level. They made the playoffs. They won meaningful games. They pushed elite teams to their limits. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when a culture is strong enough to survive adversity. And that culture doesn't just appear, it's built. Even when their star wasn't on the court, her presence was still felt. In the system, in the energy, in the way the team functioned. That's what a true franchise player does. Not just perform, but elevate everything around them.
Sammy Whitcomb. Phoenix.
Now compare that to Chicago. A team that entered with expectations. A roster that was reshaped with intention. Key additions. Strategic moves. A foundation built around a young star with a big personality and a growing brand. And then things started to fall apart. Injuries hit. Momentum disappeared. Chemistry fractured. Losses piled up. Confidence dropped. And instead of stability, there was tension. Instead of growth, there was frustration. And eventually, that frustration became public. Comments were made. Questions were raised. Doubts were introduced, not just externally, but internally. And when those moments happen, they reveal something important. Because adversity doesn't just test talent. It tests leadership. It tests accountability. It tests whether a player can carry a team, not just when things are going well, but when everything starts going wrong. And that's where the separation becomes clear. Because while one side was holding together under pressure, the other was struggling to find direction. While one team was building momentum even without its star, the other was losing ground despite having one. And in the middle of all that, the conversation about branding, recognition, and respect continued. But here's the truth that sports has always followed. The game doesn't respond to narratives. It responds to results. You can build a brand. You can build attention. You can build a voice. But if the production doesn't match it, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. And eventually, the market responds. Not emotionally. Not personally. But objectively. The numbers don't care about comparisons. They don't care about personality. They don't care about what you say. They care about what you do. And that's why one player didn't have to chase the spotlight. She forced it to follow her. Through performance. Through consistency. Through impact that could not be ignored. She didn't ask for bigger arenas. Teams moved to them. She didn't demand more attention. The audience created it. She didn't claim influence. She demonstrated it. And that's the difference between being visible and being valuable. Because true value doesn't disappear when you step off the court. It stays. It grows. It expands. Even when injured, even when sidelined, even when not playing, her presence continued to drive engagement, interest, and growth. That's not temporary. That's transformational. And that transformation didn't just affect one team or one season. It changed the trajectory of the entire league. New deals, increased salaries, expanded benefits, better conditions for players across the board. That's the ripple effect of real impact. And this brings us to the bigger question. Because this story isn't finished. The league is evolving faster than anyone expected. Records are being broken. Opportunities are expanding. The spotlight is growing. And with that growth comes a defining moment. What kind of players will shape the future? The ones who build their identity through production? Or the ones who build it through presence? Because both matter. But only one sustains. Right now, we are watching two stars rise. One rewriting what's possible through performance. The other chasing greatness with confidence, voice, and ambition. Both have potential. Both have influence. But the paths they are taking are not the same. And those paths will determine everything. Because in a league where talent, timing, and opportunity collide, only one thing ultimately decides legacy. Impact. Real. Consistent. Measurable impact. So as the next season approaches, the question isn't just who will win games. It's who will define the future. Who will move the needle, not just for themselves, but for everyone. Because the answer to that question won't just shape careers. It will shape the next decade of women's basketball. And right now, that answer is still being written.